We have multiple Leafs updates to go over today as the Leafs are finally back on the ice and ahead of the biggest game of the season against the Panthers. We have a huge Chris Tanev update. We're going to break that down, discuss what it means going forward, as well as a few other crucial Leafs updates pertaining to some of the new guys. Stay tuned for all that in this episode, folks. But before we get into it, if you're a part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. If you're part of that 71% who aren't subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And we will be live following tomorrow night's game against the Panthers, the biggest game of the season. But Darius, a bunch has happened in the last few hours, in the last day or so since the last video here. And a bunch of different things. The Leafs are finally back in the ice skating. They're off again tonight before their big game tomorrow. But out-of-town scoreboard has also helped the Leafs greatly. But let's start with the practice today. So it was announced that the Leafs will be back in Toronto practicing later this afternoon. It'll be the first time home for the new acquisitions, and an update on Chris Tanev will be provided. And we do have some of those updates to go over today. But first, let's look at Anthony Stolarz. They're all rocking the St. Patrick's Day attire and things like that. But let's look at the lines here. And we have, of course, this Chris Tanev update, which we'll dive into later in the video. So Maple Leafs lines of practice. You have Knies, Matthews, Marner, Järnkrok, Tavares, Nylander, McMahon, Lawton, Domi, Holmberg, Cam Florence with the same blue line pairing. So Darius, they're rocking a very similar, the same lines here, but a lot of fans are starting. A couple notes here. Nick Robertson is out yet again, so it seems like he will be scratched for the second game in a row following a solid game yesterday. But some fans out there are starting to call for some changes to that top line once again, which we'll dive into in a little bit. But it seems like Craig Berube is rocking a very similar lineup to the one we saw the other game in Utah, which was a very interesting game. And I don't know if hopefully they can perform better on tomorrow night's game.
Yeah, a game where they didn't really perform well, and I was saying that they had to get out of that road trip. They had to get back home to practice at home with the new guys, get them acclimated, and hopefully moved into Toronto at this point. But I'm excited to see what they're going to do the rest of the way, and they have 4 home games in a row coming up here, so it should be a good test to see what those guys have in the tank and what the team has after this, the last couple poor performances and out of character, at least for this year's Leafs team, performances from the team. But Robertson out again, very interesting. I know coaches like to stick to what works. So obviously Robertson was in when they lost last. So he comes out, they win a game. I know it wasn't pretty, but coaches like to stick to what works. So he's out of the lineup again. Obviously Holmberg too, staying up there. I thought that was interesting. So it's very similar to the same lineup. Chris Tanev also missing. We'll get to his update in a second. Thought that was interesting. I imagine Stolarz is going to get the start in this game. I mean, it would be crazy to start Woll in this game, so Stolarz is going to start. But I thought it was interesting that Robertson is out. But something I think needs to be said at this point heading into the playoffs about the first line. And we've been talking about it all year, and we saw it last season when Matthews and Marner were split up. I feel like the whole team played a little bit better. And the way that they've been playing so far this season, yes, they're putting up points. I just don't like the way that they play with each other. Like, it's just not a sustainable style, I don't think. I feel like they're always looking for the skill play or the passing and, the passing of shots, stuff like that. So just the way that they've been playing, yes, they've still been putting up points, obviously, but I don't know if it's sustainable come playoff time. So I wonder if they start putting everything in the blender because I thought that that's what was going to happen over the next couple games. Maybe not against Florida, makes sense, but doesn't seem to be happening.
You'll have to see after you see this tweet here. One of the beat reporters asked Berube why he is allergic to separating Matthews, Marner, Tavares, Nylander when they've been garbage for weeks. I think garbage for weeks is a bit of a stretch, but they haven't been playing as well as we know they can. But we've been calling on the channel for Matthews and Marner to be split up for a while. Marner's having the best season of his career, so that's probably why they're not splitting that up. And Matthews, on the other hand, has been rough. And yeah, as it pertains to Järnkrok, I think Robertson's remaining out because Cali had a power play goal in the last game, so they want to keep him in there. And Pontus Holmberg also had a very solid game. They seem to like him on the fourth line. And regarding the blue line pairings, it's the same. So Riley and Carlo stick together again. Hopefully Carlo can have a bats-back game because he had a pretty rough one against Utah. McCabe, OEL, Benoit, Myers, and Lawton remains in the middle between McMahon and Domi. And McMahon hasn't really been, I think McMahon's more of a second line guy than Järnkrok is, but they're going to keep rocking. I almost switched Järnkrok and McMahon, but again, he's coming off of a game on the power play too with a goal for Cali. So it's going to be interesting. But surrounding Chris Tanev, a couple things here. We'll dive back into the top line in a minute. But Chris Tanev is on the ice practicing with the Leafs this afternoon, and we finally got an update on that. So you can see here, we're just trying to check the boxes, and when that's there, then hopefully I'll be playing. And that's what, of course, Chris Tanev himself said surrounding his return. And then, of course, there's also some other updates. But I want to get your thoughts on this before we get into the other update. Because Chris Tanev himself, before we get into what Craig Berube said, Tanev himself came out and said they want to check all the boxes. Now, this is a very interesting one because I think it's at the point now where Chris Tanev needs to play games, but at the same time, there's some hesitancy about him being fully healthy. And that's when things start to get a little bit scary because you don't want to force the issue, especially because of how poorly some of the guys have been playing. But in the same juncture, they desperately need him back.
So a couple of weeks ago, Chris Tanev missed his first game of the year. He played every game up until that point, and obviously the Leafs were playing fantastic. Now he got injured in that game against the Boston Bruins and hasn't played since. Now the Leafs are playing very uncharacteristic for this year. They're doing things that we haven't seen since last year and previous years. So I feel like he has proven at this point that he might be their most important player on the entire team, certainly on the defensive core. He's their best defenseman. So they need him back. They desperately need him back. And when talking about this and, talking about the injury the whole time, he's been saying that he's just, he's trying to progress. He wants to feel like himself again. He wants to feel good. He doesn't want to come back and still be injured. And I think that is the correct course of action. Yes, they haven't been playing well, but you need this guy at close to 100% for the playoffs. Or you know what? Obviously, no player is 100% come playoff time, but if it's 80%, if that's the cap, then you want him as close to that as possible coming back for the playoffs. So do not play this player until he's feeling like himself again, like he's ready to go, because if he re-aggravates something, that is trouble for the Leafs in the playoffs. So they need this guy back at as close to 100% as he can possibly get. And I think that's probably at this point exactly what they're doing, although they're labeling it day to day, and we know what day to day means with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
You can see this here. He spoke out like 10 minutes ago. He's close, I'd say. He's getting better. He's improving every day. We'll just have to see. I don't really have a timeline yet. Status for big game against the Panthers. It's day to day here, and we'll make a decision tomorrow and see how he feels. But again, usually when the players are not in the game or the lineup for the practice before, they don't usually play. But this could be an interesting scenario where Tanev obviously replaces Myers in the lineup. And yeah, I mean, it's scary at this point because not only are you at the point where I mean, the defense looks really bad without him, and it hasn't looked good at all since and of course, he has some of the best advanced analytics. He's one of the best defensive defensemen, if not the best, in the NHL, and especially for this Leafs team, you could argue he's the most important player, obviously the most important defenseman, one of the most important players on the team, because if you have Matthews go down or Marner go down or whatever it ends up being, you have other guys that can step up and replace not exactly what they do, but 70% of it, we'll say, in like Nylander versus Mitch Marner, for example. But when it comes to Chris Tanev, there's not really anyone in the blue line. Like McCabe would be the closest who replaces what Chris Tanev does because he's that irreplaceable. And that's why this team has looked so much worse. And also, it affects directly the goaltending. So I don't want to rush him. I don't want him to be rushed. But if he's available, even if he's 80%, but you want him healthy for the playoffs. But the playoffs, tomorrow's game has huge implications on the playoffs. And we saw the Bruins win and come back against the Panthers. We saw Tampa Bay lose, and that's the second game in a row Tampa Bay has lost, and Florida loses. So tomorrow, the Leafs have a chance to really, really make up some ground if they can beat the Panthers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ideally, he gets into that game tomorrow, right? Because it would be nice to have him there to play the Panthers. And obviously, they're missing Matthew Tkachuk. They're missing Aaron Ekblad, right? Some significant pieces now. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. They also play the Panthers, I believe, multiple times the rest of the year. So this is not the last meeting. So it could be interesting also, meeting with Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay's lost two in a row. So things are going to get interesting because the Leafs need to finish first. That being said, I would still be cautious with Chris Tanev. Again, it would be nice if he played tomorrow as long as he's feeling well, right? But this is going to be crazy to end the year. The Leafs have to finish first. If you don't, you run the risk, especially with some of the injuries and the guys out that the Panthers have, of playing the Panthers in the first round or the Tampa Bay Lightning. Not as worried about Tampa, I have to be honest, but they are still there and they are formidable. So you have to give yourself the best chance to win, and that is finishing first in the Atlantic so you play a wild card team.
Yeah, let us know what your thoughts are. Also, let us know, do you want them to split up Matthews and Marner? It's going to be a big conversation going forward as we approach the playoffs. That'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for watching. See you later.